India fed up with Trump's bullying, Modi hits back by launching a boycott of U.S. goods.
The power of the purse. In an increasingly interconnected global economy, consumer sentiment is a force that can transcend borders. The idea of a coordinated boycott, a collective withdrawal of patronage, by one of the world's largest and fastest-growing consumer bases is a scenario that would send shockwaves through corporate boardrooms and government halls. If 1.4 billion people in India were to successfully turn away from American brands and products, the implications would be profound, complex, and far-reaching. While the immediate instinct is to declare a catastrophic blow to the U.S. economy, the reality is a nuanced tapestry of direct financial pain, strategic realignments, and unintended consequences that would redefine the U.S.-India economic partnership for decades to come. The loss of 1.4 billion customers is not just a statistic. It is a seismic event that would test the resilience of American capitalism and force a dramatic recalibration of its global strategy. The direct hit, assessing the immediate impact on U.S. corporations and exports. The most immediate and visible impact of a widespread Indian boycott would be felt on the balance sheets of American multinational corporations, MNCs, for whom India represents a critical high-growth market. Technology tightens under pressure. The American tech industry has deeply embedded itself in the Indian ecosystem. Apple's ambitious plans to make India a second manufacturing hub and a key sales market would evaporate overnight. The brand's aspirational value, meticulously built over years, would face its sternest test. A boycott would not only halt sales of iPhones, Macs, and iPads, but also severely damage its long-term strategy. Similarly, other hardware giants like Dell, HP, and Cisco, which supply everything from personal computers to critical network infrastructure for India's businesses and government, would see orders canceled and pipelines dry up. The soft power squeeze, entertainment and media. Hollywood is a global juggernaut, and India is one of its largest overseas markets. A boycott extending to American films would mean empty theaters for Marvel blockbusters, Disney animations, and Warner Bros. Franchises. The box office revenue, often amounting to tens of millions of dollars per major release from the Indian market, would vanish. Furthermore, streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Disney Plus Hotstar, which have invested billions in producing local and acquiring international content for the Indian subscriber base, would face a mass exodus. This would cripple their growth metrics and investor confidence, as the Indian streaming market is projected to be one of the largest in the world. Brands losing footprint. The shelves of urban Indian supermarkets are lined with American brands. A boycott would render them toxic assets. Companies like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, which have spent decades and immense resources building bottling plants and distribution networks to reach every corner of the country, would see their iconic brands shunned. Procter & Gamble, P&G, would find its products, from Gillette razors to Pantene shampoo and Pampers diapers, pushed aside for local or European alternatives. The fast food sector, symbolized by McDonald's golden arches and KFC's Colonel, would see footfall plummet, putting thousands of Indian jobs at their franchises at risk and nullifying their expansion plans. The engineering and capital goods freeze. Beyond consumer goods, American industrial powerhouses like Boeing, General Electric, and Caterpillar would face severe headwinds. Boeing views India as one of the top future markets for commercial aircraft, with Indian airlines like Air India and Indigo placing massive orders. A boycott could see these orders shifted to European rival Airbus. GE's contracts for supplying and maintaining jet engines and locomotives for Indian railways would be jeopardized. Caterpillar's heavy machinery, ubiquitous on Indian construction and mining sites, would be replaced by competitors from Japan or South Korea. The cumulative effect on U.S. export figures would be significant. In 2023, the U.S. exported over $50 billion in goods and services to India. While this is a substantial figure, it represents only about 2% of total U.S. exports. The immediate financial blow would be concentrated on specific sectors and corporations, rather than causing a macroeconomic collapse of the U.S. economy itself. The pain would be acute and corporate, rather than diffuse and national. The ripple effect, supply chains, investments, and the American job market. The consequences would extend far beyond lost sales. The deeply integrated nature of modern supply chains means a shock in one major economy creates ripples across the globe. Supply chain disruptions. The U.S.-India economic relationship is not a one-way street. India is a critical node in the global supply chain for numerous American companies, particularly in pharmaceuticals, technology, and services. India is the pharmacy of the world, supplying a significant portion of generic medicines and key pharmaceutical ingredients to the United States. A boycott could quickly escalate into a broader trade war, potentially disrupting the flow of these essential drugs, posing a risk to American public health and increasing healthcare costs. Foreign direct investment, FDI, in jeopardy. American companies have invested billions in India, establishing manufacturing plants, R&D centers, and service hubs. These investments are based on long-term growth projections for the Indian market. A sustained boycott would make these investments untenable, leading to write-downs, divestments, and a freeze on future capital allocation. This would hurt the Indian economy, but it would also represent a massive loss of potential future revenue and profit for these American firms. Conversely, Indian companies have also invested significantly in the United States, from Tata's ownership of Jaguar Land Rover and steel plants to IT giants like Infosys and TCS employing thousands of Americans. A boycott could put these investments and jobs at risk, creating a negative feedback loop. The American job equation. The most potent political consequence within the U.S. would be on jobs. While the U.S. economy is primarily driven by domestic consumption, its export sectors support an estimated 10.7 million jobs. A significant portion of these in sectors like aerospace, manufacturing, agriculture, and technology are tied to trade with partners like India. A sharp decline in exports to India would inevitably lead to layoffs in specific American industries. A Boeing order cancellation means less work for its factories in Washington and South Carolina. A drop in Apple sales means reduced demand for engineers in California and retail staff in Apple stores worldwide. Farmers in states like California and Washington who export almonds, apples, and lentils to India would see their income slashed. While the overall U.S. unemployment rate might not spike dramatically due to the economy's size and diversity, the localized job losses in export-dependent communities would be severe and politically explosive. The strategic and geopolitical fallout, reshaping the world order. The economic implications are merely the tip of the iceberg. The strategic consequences of such a rift between the world's two largest democracies would be monumental, offering opportunities to rivals and forcing a global realignment. China, as the primary beneficiary, a vacuum left by American companies would be filled almost instantaneously, not by Indian firms in all sectors, but overwhelmingly by Chinese competitors. Where Apple retreats, Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo would advance. Chinese smartphone brands already hold a dominant market share in India. A boycott would cement their monopoly. In entertainment, Chinese cinema and streaming platforms might seek to expand their influence. In infrastructure and engineering, Chinese companies would be ready to undercut any remaining bids, further pulling India into China's economic orbit through its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. This outcome would be a catastrophic strategic failure for the United States, effectively ceding one of the most important counterweights to Chinese influence in Asia. The Quad and Indo-Pacific strategy in tatters. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, comprising the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, is a cornerstone of American strategy to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. Its strength is not just military, but deeply economic, built on the premise of shared democratic values and mutual prosperity. A severe economic rupture between the U.S. and India would hollow out the Quad, rendering it ineffective. It would signal a failure of diplomacy and partnership, pushing India closer to a non-aligned or even Russia-leaning stance and severely diminishing American influence and credibility in the region. Markets are weapons and consumers are soldiers. It would encourage other nations and blocs to consider similar actions, potentially fragmenting the global economy into competing spheres of influence. The era of relatively free trade that has fueled global growth since World War II would suffer a potentially fatal blow, replaced by a new era of protectionism and economic blocs. The Indian counter-narrative, the cost to India itself. A full-scale boycott is often portrayed as a cost-free act of patriotism for the initiating country. In reality, the economic pain would be deeply mutual, and India would incur significant costs. Job losses and economic contraction. The American brands targeted employ hundreds of thousands of Indians directly and millions more indirectly through supply chains, retail, and logistics. McDonald's outlets are owned by Indian franchisees who employ Indian staff. Coca-Cola's bottling plants are operated by Indian companies. The IT sector, a jewel of the Indian economy, derives a substantial portion of its revenue from serving American clients. A boycott that triggers a broader trade war would put these Indian jobs at immediate risk, potentially cratering a key sector and causing widespread economic hardship. Stifling innovation and consumer choice. American companies bring not just products but competition, innovation, and high standards of quality and corporate governance. Their presence forces Indian companies to innovate and improve. Removing this competitive pressure could lead to complacency, higher prices, and inferior products for Indian consumers in the long run. The absence of global benchmarks could slow down India's own industrial and technological advancement. Capital flight and global investor panic. A government-supported or widely sanctioned boycott would be seen by the global investment community as a profoundly protectionist and unpredictable act. It would shatter investor confidence in the predictability of the Indian market. Foreign institutional investors, FIIs, might pull out of Indian stock markets, leading to a crash. Foreign direct investment, FDI, from all countries, not just the U.S., would plummet, as investors would fear their investments could be the next target of political whimsy. This would severely damage India's growth trajectory, which relies heavily on foreign capital to fund its infrastructure and development needs. The sustainability question: could a boycott even work? The premise of a unified boycott by 1.4 billion people is in itself highly theoretical. India is a vast, diverse, and fragmented nation with varying levels of income, access to markets, and political consciousness. The urban-rural divide. While urban middle-class consumers might be mobilized through social media and activism, reaching and persuading India's vast rural population, for whom brand loyalty is often secondary to price and availability, would be a Herculean task. The problem of substitution. For a boycott to be effective, viable alternatives must exist for every product category. While India has strong domestic alternatives in many areas, e.g. beverages with thumbs up, smartphones with brands like Lava, in other critical sectors like high-end technology, aerospace, and specialized manufacturing, there are no immediate Indian substitutes. This would force the government and businesses to either accept inferior technology or turn to other foreign providers, primarily Chinese or European, thus not achieving the goal of self-reliance, but merely swapping dependencies. The fading nature of public anger. Boycotts are often emotionally charged and short-lived. Maintaining the discipline and fervor required for a nationwide boycott over a sustained period is incredibly difficult. Consumer habits are deeply ingrained, and the allure of a Coca-Cola or a new iPhone is powerful. Without a continuous, palpable grievance, the momentum would likely fade, making the long-term economic impact on the U.S. more manageable. Conclusion: a Pyrrhic victory and a lesson in interdependence. A successful large-scale boycott of American goods by Indian consumers would undoubtedly wound the United States economy. It would cause billion-dollar losses for its flagship corporations, disrupt supply chains, cost American jobs in specific sectors, and deal a severe blow to its strategic ambitions in Asia. However, to view this solely as a negative for America is to misunderstand the nature of the 21st century global economy. The ensuing consequences for India would be equally, if not more, severe, risking its own economic stability, job market, and standing as a reliable destination for global capital. The greatest beneficiary would be China, and the greatest casualty would be the strategic partnership between the world's oldest and largest democracies. Therefore, such a boycott would be less a decisive victory and more a Pyrrhic one. A victory achieved at such a staggering cost that it is tantamount to defeat. It would serve as a stark, real-world lesson in the perils of economic decoupling. The true implication of losing 1.4 billion customers is not a simple subtraction from a balance sheet. It is the triggering of a complex, painful, and mutually assured economic disruption that would leave both nations poorer, less secure, and navigating a far more volatile and fragmented world. The wiser path, as difficult as it may be, remains dialogue, diplomacy, and a renewed commitment to managing economic interdependence through cooperation rather than conflict. That's all for today. Share your ideas, your thoughts, and your hopes in the comments below. Your opinion is valuable and enriches the debate. Don't forget to